Okay, so let's talk about some of the most basic foundational strategies for overcoming depression. And we'll do a second video looking at some of the more advanced approaches. So, the basics, whenever I talk with someone who identifies having struggled with depression for any amount of time, the first thing I'm looking for is, have there been any profound losses or changes in a person's life? So sometimes folks feel like they're absolutely depressed. And when we talk about what's been happening in their lives, we find a huge loss. The most notable is the death of a family member or somebody that they were very close to in a friendship or other type of relationship. And in those moments, what we see is grief. And while the person identifies feeling depressed, what they may not be identifying is what a counselor would call unresolved grief and loss. So there is a sadness, there is a deep pain that perhaps we're coping with, perhaps we're not coping with well at all. It's actually very common that I talk to people who have this fear that allowing themselves to grieve and let go of the person that they've lost would somehow be to dishonor them or to not value, treasure their memory. For a lot of folks, they tell me that they're afraid that letting go will result in not being able to picture their loved one just in their mind or not being able to hear the sound of their voice. And I give them the hard news that memory fades over time, whether we grieve or not. So letting go of pain through grieving is not letting go of the positive memories. It's not letting go of everything that we learned or valued or experienced with that person. It's simply letting go of the profound sadness that is loss. We know about the 5 stages of grieving, or perhaps we don't. Quick review: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are what counselors have traditionally called the 5 stages of grief and loss. There's a lesser known model referred to as the tier model, and I encourage folks to Google that and check that out, because even after we come to a place of accepting a loss in our lives, we still have to move on and adjust to life without that person, place, or thing in our lives. And that is oftentimes very difficult to do. The second thing that I'm going to look for in a person who is experiencing depression is, how have they had a medical checkup? There's a number of medical conditions that can alter mood and put a person into a place of depression. Most notably, thyroid problems are notorious for causing depression. And so a person who has really had a healthy, well-adjusted life suddenly feels a profound level of depression, isn't able to identify really anything in their life that is causing that sadness. And so I just want to make sure that they get medically cleared and that we've exhausted any possible physiological cause of their depression. The third thing that I'm looking for is the quality of their daily life and specifically the relationships within them. So I have a story I tell of a young couple that I met with years ago to do marriage counseling. And they came to me, they were very distraught, and they told me all about their lives. They told me that they had grown up in very good families, they had gone to good schools, they had played sports and gotten good grades, they'd been very successful, and they went to college on scholarships and got very good grades and earned their degrees, and they went out and got very good jobs, and they bought a very nice house, and they found that they were depressed and they were outraged. They couldn't understand why. And so when we got together, we talked about what was essentially their version of the American dream and their belief that that was supposed to result in happiness. And I had to give them some hard news about how pursuing the things that have great social value, the things that we've declared as what makes a person successful, are not necessarily satisfying. So pursuing happiness isn't really a goal that I see as worthy. Happiness is fleeting. It's an emotional experience, it's a choice. I encourage people to pursue joy and fulfillment and satisfaction and things that tend to endure. But in order to do that, you have to have some sense of identity. You have to have some sense of what it is that you most want. What is your passion or passions? What do you see as meaningful and purpose driven? And for some folks, there's a spiritual connection to that. For others, there's an artistic connection, or simply a high value on having very close ties to family and friends. But I think it is a certain amount of self-actualization, of awareness of self, and noticing what brings you joy, what detracts from it. And quite hard to do when we're young. I think most of us spend our 20s trying to figure out who we are and what it is we want. We spend our 30s trying to attain that. And if we have any degree of success, we're liable to just ride that out. But when we get to be about 40, there's a still point where we have this awareness of our mortality. We recognize that we're about halfway through, and we ask ourselves, is this really working out? And if it is, well, we'll continue. And if it's not, that's the most common age that I see people come for therapy and say, well, I'm unhappy with my life. I feel depressed. I don't feel fulfilled. And so those are some of the starting points. We're going to jump in the next probably 2 videos into how to cope with those and how to begin overcoming.